So recently, Selena Gomez posted this on her IG, and I absolutely agree with her. She said, "It pains me to know how many people may not know truly about Steve Martin's life. He's truly an icon." And I absolutely agree. So on Apple TV, there's a two-part documentary on Steve Martin. The guy on the right is the wild and crazy guy, Steve Martin, from the 70s, and the guy on the left is the only murders in the building, Steve Martin, who are two totally different guys. The guy on the right was just insane, just a physical comedian, just out of this world funny. And the other guy on the right is also funny, but more of a straight man type funny. But I'll get into that in a second. Um, let's go back to what Selena was saying. I wholeheartedly agree with her. It pains me when I hear young people say that they don't know anything that came out maybe back in the 90s or even in the 80s. So I get it. That's a lot of time, you know. That's a lot of years ago. So I totally understand it. And even when I was a young person, like when I was in college and there was so much sampling going on, and there's a lot of artists that I didn't know existed. I never heard of Cannonball Adderley. I knew some jazz, but I didn't know of Cannonball Adderley. I knew of Roy Ayers. I heard of Roy Ayers at that point, but I didn't know about the deep cuts that he made. So even for me, who was trying to be as well informed as possible, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know because I was young. However, in these days and times, the problem, and the adults kind of did this to the kids. They create these playlists, they create these recommendations using an algorithm. So what happens if you go on Spotify? It's like, hey, if you like Spotify, you like this song, here's a song that's similar that you like. If you go on YouTube and you're watching a video, they suggest some videos that the algorithm says, oh, okay, if you like this video, you also would like this video, which is great. It sends you down a rabbit hole of things that you already kind of like and introduce you to new things that you didn't know existed, which is fantastic. However, when you do something like that, it kind of puts you in a niche. Back in the day when I was a kid, I only watched, for the most part, NBC, CBS, NBC. We had three channels, 3, 5, and 8. I think Channel 19 was around, and you had Channel 43. And on Channel 43, that's where I saw Star Trek, because it was a 60s show. We talk about me in the 70s. Star Trek was on. What else 60s show was on? Like Green Acres, The Beverly Hillbillies, Gilligan's Island. Like, you had all these shows from the 60s I was on for repeats, which is great. And then on Sundays, Saturdays and Sundays, to show these old movies. So you would see like Vincent Price movies, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis movies, James Cagney movies, Humphrey Bogart movies. So you got to see these movies, these black and white movies from the past that I wasn't around back then. Three Stooges, Marx Brothers. Like, I'm grateful for the time that I grew up in where we had limited choices, because it introduced me to a lot of things that were around before I was even born. It's so frustrating to me, like, we have this generation of kids. And again, I'm not blaming them fully because it's the algorithm's problem. But they have all this stuff on their phone. They can find any 90s TV show, any 80s TV show, any 70s TV show. You could very easily, if you watch Steve Martin on Only Murders in the Building, if it was me, I was like, oh, okay, Steve Martin's clearly older. Well, let me see what he was like when he was younger. And then you go into the SNL Steve Martin or the Jerk Steve Martin. So I'm grateful for the era that I grew up in, and I feel bad for these young folks. So let's get into the documentary. I haven't watched the documentary yet, but let me tell you something. That Steve Martin on the right was hilarious. If you don't know anything about Steve Martin, go watch his hosting appearances on SNL. Go watch The Jerk. The Jerk is a masterful, it is a masterful movie directed by Carl Reiner, Rob Reiner's dad. He basically takes the wild and crazy guy persona that he kind of crafted over the years and just made him to this dumb dude who was in love with Bernadette Peters and who created these glasses. And it's in his background having a black mom. It's so crazy that I doubt some of that stuff they did in that movie you can't do today. But it's funny, like when Steve, so he made The Jerk. The Jerk was huge. And the next movie after that was Pennies From Heaven. First of all, I don't know how my mama allowed me to sneak around and watch The Jerk. And I don't know, we probably was watching, I was probably to my cousin's house or something, and so I watched both of these movies. Pennies From Heaven comes out, and that movie was totally different from The Jerk. Totally different. And I was like, well, where's the wild and crazy guy at? Like, where's the guy with the white suit? Where's the guy from The Jerk? he basically, on Pennies From Heaven, he killed that character. Not killed in a good way. He destroyed that character. It's like when De La Soul went from the first album to De La Soul is Dead. That's what he did. He killed the suitcase. He killed the white suit. He killed all that stuff because I guess he felt like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as this dude. And when he did that, it's almost like he influenced a lot of comedians after that. Because I think after that, Robin Williams kind of did the same thing. Jim Carrey would later do the same thing. Adam Sandler did the same thing. It kind of told those guys, hey, you don't have to be this comedian guy all the time. You can shift and change into something dramatic. And he shifted. And it took a while. I think he had The Man with Two Heads. Like, he was kind of scuffling for a minute. But then he ended up having, like, Father of the Bride and Three Amigos and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with John Candy. And then that's when he slowly morphed into this guy. Because if you watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, he was a straight man. It was John Candy who was the wild, funny guy in that. Even if you watch Three Amigos, like, he really let Martin Short and Chevy Chase be more of those dudes. Like I think Steve was very calculating what he did, because I think if he would have stayed the wild and crazy guy, Steve Martin on the right, he would have burned out. He would have burned out because you can't keep that up. And tastes change. And I didn't know, even when I was watching The Wild and Crazy Guy, I didn't know he was a writer on the Smothers Brothers, because I wasn't even born when the Smothers Brothers were out. So then I found out later he was a writer of the Smothers Brothers, which is fantastic. And now we get this Steve Martin for Only Murders in the Building, which he deserves an Emmy for, just as a Lifetime Achievement Award, man. It's a good show. I mean, Murders in the Building is actually a really good show. But it's ridiculous that this dude is snubbed every year for an Emmy. So what do you guys think? Do you think Selena Gomez is right? Do you think Steve Martin is overlooked as a comedian? And also, what do you think about young folks who don't seem to know a lot about past pop culture when they have all the information on their phones? And finally, let me know what your favorite Steve Martin project is. I have two. I mentioned The Jerk. Jerk is always number one. But number two is Roxanne. I'm a hopeless romantic at heart. The whole scenario of the Bergerac story always spoke to me as a kid. Because in some ways I felt like that guy. And his performance in Roxanne, because I remember when that film was out, they said he might have been nominated for an Oscar for that role. I can't remember if he was or wasn't. I don't think he was. But it was Oscar worthy. Because the ability that you're in love with someone, but you don't know how to tell them this, and another guy kind of assumes he's taking your words and he gets the girl, is just heartbreaking. But Steve is so good. I think it was like him and Daryl Hannah. Roxanne is a beautiful movie. It's a funny movie. It's a beautiful movie. And even after I get off from here, I'm going to go to the library and pick up the copy of that film. So tell me what you like about Steve Martin, favorite films, and tell me about these kids.